How you doing, everybody? It's Wardy here, and as you can see, we're back at it, breaking down the latest in Mets land. And in our jam-packed Big Mets update segment, we have plenty to get into, beginning with David Wright. Yes, we know our captain will officially be in Mets history forever with number 5 on July 19th, but he spoke to the media today, so we're going to hear some remarks from him. From there, we'll get into the Polar Bear and Pete Alonso and the controversy that is his contract demands. Because a day ago, we heard from his agent, famous Mr. Scott Boras, saying how I'm going to use the Prince Fielder 9-year, $240 million contract as a model, a comp for what we're looking for Alonso. Well, fast forward a day later, there's a lot more controversy with it. There's a lot more things to say, hey, that isn't necessarily true. So let's get into what is accurate versus inaccurate, why Bob Nightingale has us all in a loop. Not the first time if we go back to the Trevor Bauer sweepstakes. If you know, you know. From there, we will get into the latest on Alex Bregman, where the Mets stand from one reporter to another. And to wrap up the show there, we're going to get into the Mets' interest or lack thereof in Alex Verdugo, formerly of the New York Yankees. Why or why not? That makes sense. And we'll also get into Mark Vientos, Juan Soto to wrap up the show. So thank you guys so much for smashing a like and subscribe button as your first chime in. It means a lot. Let me know your initial reactions to it all in the comments down below, everybody. And shout out to our amazing sponsor at BetUS, but we'll talk about them later on in today's segment, because let's first begin with the news that you guys see beside me. Yeah, if you guys don't know, I have been a reoccurring host there for not only the Mets, but MLB-wide topics in the Bleacher Report app over the past year or so, and I'm very grateful to announce that I will be a weekly host for them every single week throughout the course of the offseason and regular season here for Bleacher Report, covering MLB-wide topics, all hot-button topics, very similar to what we do here on the platform every day, but more not only Mets, but this time having to do with the league as a whole there. Wednesday to Friday, 4 p.m. Eastern sharp, every single day there throughout the remainder of the week. My buddy Steve Peralt will be handling days Monday and Tuesday throughout the week for our daily MLB show. So hope to see you guys there in the Bleacher Report app, as nothing will change here on the platform. We're just continuing to grind and continuing to move up here in the sports space here with your guy Wardy. But now let's get into the news, folks, and let's start here with Mr. David Wright, because we did see David talk to the media today, and let's get into his first big quote having to do with the Pete Alonso situation. From there, we'll get into some other remarks that he shared today on his gratitude of course, being retired, his number being retired, along with his importance as a Met and what it meant to him to be a Met versus other aspects of being a baseball player in general. So let's see. David Wright, we see here, speaks on Pete Alonso's future and how much it meant to him personally to play for one team in his career. And I quote, "It's a different feeling when you're drafted, developed, and playing for the team that you gave your first opportunity. There's a little more, maybe a lot more pride when you put that jersey on every night." And I hope he remembers that and doesn't lose sight of that. With that being said, I've never ever faulted a player for maximizing his earning potential and going to try to make a great living for him and his family. I can't fault him whatsoever. But at the same time, I remember what hit home big time for me when I was there, when we were in Atlanta towards the end of Chipper's tenure, and seeing Chipper's emotions and his words, having spent his entire career in Atlanta, certainly hit home for me. And obviously playing across town from Derek Jeter, seeing how much that meant to him. I certainly learned a lot from them, learned a lot from afar, just kind of following them, what they would say, what they would act, and how much it would mean to them to put the same uniform on for their entire career. I think that should certainly be a consideration. Hopefully it is a consideration for Alonso when he's looking for his next team or coming back to New York. I think that was beautifully said there by Wright, and he put it perfectly. Again, I don't fault Alonso whatsoever for hitting the market, but the market is what it is right now, and there's a sizable gap right now between the Mets and Alonso on years, as is the case with Alonso and any other team that he's potentially negotiating with Scott Boras right now. And simply put, he wants at least a certain amount of years that we'll get into shortly, folks, whereas the Mets, like many other teams, don't really want to go beyond probably 3 at this rate for good reason. So we'll get into more on Alonso there in just a couple minutes, everybody, but more here from the captain himself. Let's hear his words on the signing of Juan Soto.
I mean, not only from a baseball standpoint, but from an image point, that the Mets got this player that was the most desirable person during free agency.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's huge. And, it doesn't seem like, it seems like the will to win within the organization is incredible. I mean, it's a win at all costs, do whatever you can to win type mentality. And that's something that I love. It's something that the city loves. It's something that the fan base certainly loves. And, I think that it's not just, the goal is not just set now to win one championship. It's, hey, let's go on a run and win multiple championships. And that's a mindset and an attitude that I think any player or any fan or anybody can get behind. So, I think that it certainly shows that the level of commitment to win, but on a kind of a more important note, I think that it's not just for show. Like it's ownership and this front office, they want to put a winning product out there on the field and a product that's going to entertain and win a lot of baseball games. So I couldn't be more excited for 2025.
The thought of a Steve Cohen ran Mets with David Wright on the roster, what should have been, and man, oh man, what could have been. That's the only thing I can think of when I see Wright talk, because no one deserves to have a team like what the Mets are building now more than Wright during his long-lasting tenure with the Mets. And unfortunately, with that spinal stenosis and all the reoccurring back issues that he had in the latter half of his career, he just was never able to be the player that he wished he could have been back in his prime days with the Mets. And it's something that we're always going to look back on and say, what a captain he was, what a leader he was, and man, oh man, was it taken from us too soon. David Wright, hope to see him more actively involved in the Mets organization as years go forward under Steve Cohen. So hopefully he too can appreciate it in his own way, the continued success the Mets will have with Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor, hopefully Pete Alonso, and everyone else in company. Now, to go from what we see here from David Wright talking about Juan Soto, the final quote that I have for you guys in regards to this is the following. So let me pull it up right here.
Losing in a Mets uniform for me was devastating, but winning in a Mets uniform for me was sweeter than anything else that I could possibly imagine because of the trials and tribulations and having gone through everything and being a Met for life just meant more to me than, kind of a mercenary type player. But again, nothing wrong with that. But I think that I enjoyed those rivalries because of the guys that were there for greater lengths of period, I guess.
Love that. Love hearing that from David as well. And I think there's something being noted of, again, losing in a Mets uniform, thriving in a Mets uniform, right? There are very few players that we can look at throughout the history of the Mets organization that really embodied what it meant to be a Met. Obviously, we have plenty throughout the decades that we think of, but when I think of one right away, especially in my generation of Mets fans, David Wright is automatically one of, if not the first, that comes to mind. Not only a selfless human being on and off the field, but one who absolutely bled orange and blue up until the very end and is still doing it until to this day, rather. So now, everybody, let's go from talking about our former captain, our still captain, but hopefully Lindor gets the official label next, to now getting into the latest on Mr. Pete Alonso. And it begins with what you guys see right here. So I was doing a little digging and looking up to see if Bob Nightingale dropped anything else since his article that he came out with yesterday, and something very peculiar popped up that I noticed. And this is completely genuine. No one told me about this in advance. I knew about it, at least, because after the fact, after I tweeted this, someone commented that they mentioned my live show, but I didn't realize that yesterday. But to the left, you'll see in this article, I'm not going to click on it because it's going to be taken away. You won't be able to see it in the frame. But at the end of the article, we saw, when talking about Alonso through Nightingale yesterday, that is where we saw Scott Boras state that he's been throwing out the 9-year $214 Prince Fielder figure as a comp for Alonso contract negotiations. Fast forward a day later, everybody, the final two sentences have changed in that article from Bob Nightingale, and that statement about Scott Boras and about the Prince Fielder contract comp is completely gone. So what does this tell me? A, Nightingale was wrong, and or B, he was told to pull it, which very well could have been essentially from Boras himself to an extent, because we joke about how a lot of talking heads in the space, whether it's the Heymans, whether it's the Nightingales, whether it's the Morosi's, who have you, are all just talking heads at times for agents, and to a degree, it's understandable in the sense that they are relayed information from agents, and there is an objective behind it, to continue a bidding war, to see how other teams are going to react to it in the media aspect of things. There is always incentive behind that. So clearly, there's incentive behind this decision. I'm curious if it had a lot to do with like yesterday's content, everyone else kind of really blowing it up on how even if Alonso isn't the one verbatim saying I want a 9-year contract, to hear Scott Boras use that as the comp is just so flawed. It makes anything but sense for Alonso and what he should be actively seeking this offseason. So I want to call that out. Nightingale, I will give credit where credit's due. He's actually been one of the more credible reporters the past couple of years, if you exclude the Trevor Bauer situation. And there was one other bigger circumstance I know he missed on. I think it was 2 years ago around the deadline. Outside of, though, Nightingale has been pretty credible, and this is just an interesting one to follow, because I wonder how much of it is inaccurate, or is Boris really doing that, but now he just doesn't want it in the public eye? Like, that's one of those things I'm really curious about, to be a fly on the wall in that decision room when Nightingale was told or decided to take it out of his piece. And the reason why we're emphasizing the controversy with this is because this had so many Mets fans, including myself yesterday, like in a flux. Like, are you kidding me? Like, Pete, we love you, buddy. We will love you back. But you must be smoking that good stuff that, again, 21 and up. Not for me, not for you, not for nobody. Because that shouldn't even be legal. Because you are clearly not in the right state of mind if you're thinking you're going to get a 9-year deal. I'm all for shooting for the stars. Absolutely, go get your bag, baby. But, like, at the same time, like, let's be at least a little bit logical, a little bit sensical here, right? The Mets have been, David Stearns has been, they've been very diligent. They're not rushing anything. They're sitting back and relaxing. They know that the market is not in Alonso's favor. And speaking of Alonso and what he thinks is in favor of him, he is in favor, at least, of a contract structure of at least a 6-year deal, per John Heyman today on Bleacher Report. And speaking of John Heyman, everybody, it was really cool that you guys can actually see it on the Bleacher Report app. John went live at 3 p.m. Eastern today, and I went live at 4 right after him. So to kind of piggyback off him right away, and the BR app talking about similar topics, latest news, rumors, stuff like that, that was very cool, and I am appreciative of that. But Alonso's reportedly looking for at least a 6-year deal. Not shocking. We know that Alonso entering the offseason was looking for a 6-7-year contract. But here's the thing. Even with it being January 8th and there still being time, the Mets aren't rushing here, nor is Alonso, but it's like, who's going to blink first, right? Because how much are we buying into the Toronto Blue Jays, the Boston Red Sox, the Seattle Mariners? I'm trying to think of others that actually have reported interest as of late in Alonso. There's a couple out there, the San Francisco Giants, the LA Angels. I mean, there's a handful for sure that like Pete, but most are in the exact, not just most, all right now are in the exact same boat, saying, hey, we like you a lot, Alonso, but we like you a lot at this rate. Now, could things change if, say, the Bregman and or Anthony Santander domino falls before Alonso? Could that change the desperation and the willingness for a team like Toronto or a team like San Fran to really go absolutely scorched earth bananas, go and put everything into Alonso because they're that desperate? That's possible, and we'll worry about that if we get to that point. But Alonso, Bregman, both represented by Boris, obviously. Santander, another big piece out there. I have a feeling we might find out about Santander before Bregman and Alonso at this rate. I feel like that's certainly a possibility. And we'll touch on Santander and more, including Tanner Scott, as that was reported, the Mets connection from Will Salmon of The Athletic. Will Salmon will be joining us tomorrow night, right around 8:30 p.m. Eastern, folks. Was supposed to be tonight, but we had to reschedule. No worries whatsoever. So we'll have Will back on tomorrow to break down his latest reporting and any new news that he has heard in Mets land from the Mets insider side of things, working with The Athletic, being an analyst there on SNY, Baseball Night in New York, doing fantastic things. We love Will on the platform. Appreciate him. But to get back in this one, Alonso, a 6-year deal. The Mets don't even want to give more than half that right now. They probably don't want to go beyond 3 for $90. Understandably so, including an opt-out after the first and or second season. If you're the Mets, at what point do you say, okay, this is enough? Or are you completely content with being patient for the next month plus, knowing that you still have time? Because if there are things in favor of the Mets, at least, God forbid, if they do not bring back Alonso and he does go elsewhere, after maybe they thought they were really actually going to bring him back, they do have Vientos. And that is something to make note of, because they will be able to immediately shift Vientos to first and then try to go all in on a player that we're going to discuss in a second, because it pairs with our discussion, or other targets out there for third base that are external, if not internal, that the Mets can consider. I think there's no denying that this team downgrades in the infield if they just move Vientos to first and stay in-house for their third base options between Beatty, Mauricio, Acuna, etc. But I do think that there's a world where they could still thrive without Alonso. I just think that there's an inevitable world where the Mets still side him until proven otherwise. So now going from Alonso, let's talk about a man that has been in plenty of rumbling, not so much with the Mets as of late, but that may change. And that's going to be Mr. Alex Bregman. And this goes in hand with a quote that we did find, and I do want to show you guys right here. And shout out as well to Mets fan 2025, a follower of mine on X, for making me see this, because I did go back in the Nightingale article, and it is true. This was initially from a piece from Bleacher Report, but it states how Nightingale did make note that the Mets are the most intriguing team in the Bregman sweepstakes. Now, I would like to clarify, they're not technically the most intriguing team. Nightingale stated that they could be the most intriguing team, and that is already where the whisper down the alley, you have one person saying one thing versus another. I want to make sure that you guys know for certain what Nightingale put in his report. He said that the Mets could be the most intriguing team for Alex Bregman, in which numerous scouts and numerous execs across baseball have stated that it feels very strongly that if the Mets do not bring back Alonso, they're going to sign Alex Bregman. And if they don't sign Alex Bregman, it's because they're signing Alonso. Is there potential that the Mets could sign both? Yes. But per Andy Martino of SNY yesterday, he said that Alex Bregman is the least likely scenario as a Alonso alternative, which I wholeheartedly disagree with. Same way how Andy Martino thought that the Yankees were the top dog the entire way through up until the end, where the Mets were, again, not in the same position to land Juan Soto. Again, these are opinions. I understand them, and also varies with what Andy hears executive-wise versus what Nightingale hears, where Nightingale's an MLB-wide reporter, and Andy is more local for Mets and Yanks, so you think he has an advantage there, and he does to a degree, but it doesn't mean he has everything right. The same way that Nightingale certainly does it. The same way that Heyman even does it, Arson Judge. It doesn't matter. You get what I'm trying to say here. So in the case of the Bregman sweepstakes, per John Heyman, we see the following teams as the most likely to land Alex Bregman. And those teams are the following: the Boston Red Sox and the Detroit Tigers. Now, personally, I don't think that is entirely true. We'll see if that changes, just because the Red Sox feel more likely to potentially bring in Arenado between the two. They don't want to give Bregman the term, but they like Bregman's shorter term, higher AAV. They don't want to give Bregman a 6-7-year deal like what he wants. The Toronto Blue Jays, per not Heyman, but this time in Nightingale from his article yesterday, stated that the Blue Jays have been easily the most aggressive and the most in on Alex Bregman. Like, they have been the top suitor for him this entire time. But here's the thing. Toronto probably has a lot of money out there for Bregman right now, and the closest in term, but it's the fact that Bregman doesn't want it. Alex would have taken it already. Toronto clearly the top suitor right now on willing to suspend and stuff of that nature. And that is the case. That all you need to know is that Bregman hasn't signed there yet. He wants Detroit to meet him on the years. Who knows if it's going to happen? There's there's a big gap there, per Nightingale from his piece yesterday. For the Mets here, they can really swoop in, especially short-term high AAV. And I will continue to beat this damn drum in hopes and praying that it can happen as someone who has optimism in Bregman still, even if it's more on the outside looking in as a reality of happening. And the reason why I continue to beat this drum is because I want the best team possible next season. And Alex Bregman makes the Mets a better team than what they currently are right now. When you think about Breggy, you think about not only the strong defense, Gold Glove defense this past season, you think about the home run heroics, where he would have had the same home runs with the Mets every game throughout the 162, all games in Citi Field versus his normal stats. So thankfully, the splits for Citi Field don't really dictate his offensive production at all. But for Breggy, why could this make sense? High AV, short-term contract, similar contract in value that you'd approach Alonso with, and give him the opt-outs after the first and or second year. Because if the market shrinks enough for Bregman, who's only 30 years of age, right? He could sign with the Mets at an AAV where he's making easily, we could see him making north of, between 25 and 30 million for this upcoming season. If not, if they could incentivize a big time with a heavy bonus, just for the sake of bringing him in and hoping that, okay, we sign him to that 1-year deal at least. And then in similar fashion to Matt Chapman, another Scott Boras client from a couple years ago, Chapman signed that contract short-term deal with the Giants, and then he was extended and got into a long-term deal after the fact. We saw Blake Snell take the short-term deal with the Giants, get a longer-term deal there the next year with the Dodgers. Just because the market is not necessarily in their favor this year does not mean it won't be the year after. Yes, would Bregman be taking risk? Without question. But he's already won his championship, so I guess the big question is, how much is a priority to get the highest AAV now versus the most guaranteed money? Because the most guaranteed money, again, it's hard to envision him getting a 6-7-year contract right now from a suitor. It feels more likely that he'll be in that 4-5-year range with potentially a 6-year option if we're really going to go that far. But for Alex Bregman, the Mets' interest, they can really pounce here should they find themselves in a similar situation to the Matt Chapman contract with Scott Boras. So it's not like he's unfamiliar. And Scott Boras has been very familiar with contracts of letting things drag out too little, too late, too long, and having to have his star players settle on short-term high AV deals with said opt-outs. This is not unfamiliar. There's a great reality where it could happen for not only Alex Bregman, but both Bregman and Alonso both of the top names available represented by Scott Boras this offseason, everybody. So now to go from Breggy, let's talk a little briefly on a player that I'm sure very little you guys want anything to do with. And I do understand it, certainly to a larger degree than most other players that we critique on the platform. And that's Alex Verdugo. As of yesterday, the Mets were one of multiple teams involved in Verdugo. I have heard word, though, that the Pirates are very close to landing Alex Verdugo on a 1 or 2 year deal, so I hope that's true, because I don't want Alex Verdugo. And before I break down the numbers on Alex Verdugo, I'm actually going to start with this, which I think is important to note. And the Mets know this, obviously. David Stearns knows this, obviously. And I also understand that there hasn't been anything that's really come out of this, but it's just something to make note of. There are a lot of people in the game of baseball that aren't the biggest fan of Alex Verdugo, and it's not so much about his lack of being a league average hitter the past 2 years. It's more so what we saw in February of 2020, where reports surfaced of an alleged assault of a 17-year-old girl during which Alex Verdugo was present back in 2015. Accounts of the incident, which involved multiple women, not including the victim, and another Dodgers minor leaguer at the time, state that Verdugo was in the bathroom and at the time of the alleged sexual assault. And the incident continued with the victim became sick and was beaten up by the 2 women involved in the incident after they exited the hotel room bathroom. The victim stated that the physical assault was filmed and posted to Snapchat. Nick Francona, the Dodgers assistant director of player development at the time, was asked in an interview if it was Verdugo who posted the video to Snapchat, and his response was, "That was my understanding." Verdugo has said in the public eye since then that basically, I'm good, nothing happened to me, like we don't have to really talk about it anymore, and that's really all he has that he's pretty much touched on. He's like, there's really no need to beat this drum because I was cleared of everything of all wrongdoing, but this is just in general not a great situation. And when you have the Dodgers assistant director on record stating that that's his understanding, that Verdugo was there, that he recorded the incident of all those things transpiring, that is why a lot of people, separate from Verdugo as the player, are not a fan of Alex Verdugo. So that right away is why I would prefer if Alex Verdugo wasn't on my team. Now, I know my Mets are the same team that's represented guys like Jose Reyes in the past, and there's been controversy, but then was brushed away, or at least was denied after the fact with Jeurys Familia over the years, among many other players. And let's not forget just all of the 80s, obviously. Just not a fan to hear that. But if we talk about Verdugo as the player, why do the Mets have interest? It's because he's a defense-first guy is what they'd be getting, and a guy that does have a very good plate approach in the sense that he does not chase at all. He was in the 93rd percentile this past season in whip percentage. He was in over the 70th percentile in chase percentage, 96 in squared up percentage, so he squares up on the baseball really well. He doesn't strike out at all, yet he didn't even have a 300 on base last season in that Yankees lineup, and he also didn't even have a 700 OPS. So how can the Mets get Alex Verdugo right? Well, how you get Alex Verdugo right is in a limited platoon role is what the Mets would have him in, pretty much to be the Jesse Winker replacement. And the reason why I have a problem with this is I like Jesse Winker a lot more. Verdugo's younger. Maybe you can argue he has more higher offensive upside. After 2 below league average years there, we have seen Jesse Winker only have 1 below league average year over the past 5-6 years, and that was in his injury-riddled year in Milwaukee a couple years ago. So I would love Jesse Winker, the vibes, the aura, everything it brings, 10 out of 10 over Alex Verdugo. But if Jesse Winker goes elsewhere because they just don't rekindle the relationship for one reason or another, don't be shocked if the Mets find themselves landing Verdugo, as the Mets were this close to landing him an offseason ago, and I can say that in confidence, as the Mets were reportedly a finalist there before he landed with the New York Yankees. Just like they were very close to landing Manuel Margot as well as a 4th outfielder option before they ultimately then settled there with Harrison Bader and Tyrone Taylor as their tandem there for center field for 2024 rather. Verdugo, he can play mainly left field, can play in right field as well. You can put him in center, even though he's not good there whatsoever. And Verdugo is not too far removed from being one of the better gap-to-gap left-handed hitters in all Major League Baseball. Verdugo quite literally was fantastic with his doubles and extra base hits ability, but it's really plummeted the past 2 years in his career. And you just have to wonder, for a guy who still is only 28 years of age, part of that huge Mookie Betts contract that we all thought, trade at the time, that we all thought was lopsided then and still do now. You have to wonder what Alex Verdugo at this point in his career, who feels like he's falling more in the Harrison Bader territory where the bat continues to diminish, Jekyll and Hyde, but you're more known as a defensive first guy. The problem with Verdugo is that while his defensive numbers aren't horrendous by any stretch, because he's in the 76th percentile in OAA, 96 in arm value, 94th in arm strength, He's not an overly fast runner, so he can definitely be behind on balls. He's had good positioning. He has good strength, and that's awesome. But if you can have someone in a platoon role, I'm still taking Jesse Winker every day of the week, even with him not being as good defensively. And that is true. Jesse Winker is a night and day difference, and that's where the David Stearns talk comes into play. He wants a defensive first minded Mets team at times, so that way they have a balance with that in the offense. I understand it to a degree, but I also understand being completely against Alex Verdugo, and for good reasoning. So that's the latest there on Alex Verdugo, everybody. Hopefully the Pittsburgh Pirates pick him up, but if the Mets don't say settle with Jesse Winker because they don't like his lack of defense, and say they don't go for Anthony Santander, they don't want to land him on short-term high AV because he takes a longer-term deal from Toronto or elsewhere, they go from Jock Pearson swinging and missing, Teoscar Hernandez swinging and missing, to no Jesse Winker, no Anthony Santander, but Alex Verdugo as your final impact bat option outside of one of Alonso or Bregman potentially, because there isn't a likelihood of both right now. Not loving that, I got to be honest with you. So that's the latest there on Alex Verdugo, everybody. So before we wrap this one up, and to make sure that this is under a half hour, and I do apologize for that, everybody, there's just a lot of things happening in Mets land. We're going to have plenty more to break down with each and every one of you guys tomorrow. We did see from Michael Mayer Metsmerize that there were a couple minor league transactions here for the Mets as of late. They signed Travis Swaggerty and infielder Yoni Hernandez to minor league deals. Swaggerty had an 800 OPS at any ball last season and has 5 MLB career games to date. And Hernandez split the 2024 season between AAA and the Long Island Ducks. And the Mets also re-signed right-handed pitcher Brian Metoyer. I'm going to butcher the last name. I'm not going to try any further. But that's the latest minor league transactions that the Mets have made. Here's Juan Soto, as he was in attendance today there for the DR, Dominican Republic, their Winter League game. And he was there to throw out the first pitch for the Tigers today for one of the DR teams there, which is very cool. So Juan Soto in attendance there that we saw. Absolutely love to see that. Look at that stud. Anything Juan Soto was, I'm very happy to see. I also saw Juan Soto talking about the Mets, but I don't know what he said. It was completely in Spanish, and I'm not going to try to translate it. But if it was definitely good. It was saying something Vamos Mets he was talking about, and that's all I got. And again, I apologize for my lack of knowledge outside of English. I am a dummy when it comes to that one. And Mark Vientos is where I want to wrap this one up with, everybody, because Marky V says, according to Sean Sprawling here, very interesting. Mark Vientos can be represented for Team Nicaragua there to qualify for the World Baseball Classic, but then play for the Dominican Winter League in the World Baseball Classic, because he has his eyes set potentially on playing for DR over Nicaragua, which goes against what he initially was doing back in 2023 during the WBC. So things have changed, and honestly, I love Vientos, but he'd probably be riding the bench the entire time for Team DR, knowing how stacked they'd be. I kind of would prefer him to be playing for Team Nicaragua personally, and I did see he did come out with an awesome message to Mets fans on his Instagram. Check it out. Just saying Happy New Year, everybody. God first is always very motivated for this year, and I really appreciate the fans. So make sure to check that out, everybody. But that is the latest in Mets land. What our big Mets update segment. So let me know in the comments down below your big takeaway from everything that we discussed today, from Alonso to Wright to Bregman to Verdugo and everything in between. And stay tuned for our live show later on tomorrow evening with Mets Insider, and on the beat there for the Mets through the Athletic, Will Salmon. Thank you guys again for watching, and as always, no matter what, let's go Mets, baby. Peace out.